Strikethroughs in Markdown let you add a strikethrough, which is a line going through any text in your document. You can see it in action over here. A strikethrough is often used to indicate that this is something that maybe is out of date or should no longer be considered relevant, but you still want to include that text in the document so that users are aware of the change. Let's take a look at how you can use strikethroughs. One important note before we begin is that strikethroughs are non-standard, so they are fairly widely supported, but there's no guarantee that your Markdown engine will support them. And your Markdown engine also might use a slightly different syntax as well. So just keep that in mind. I'll actually show an alternative at the end of this video to add strikethroughs even if your Markdown engine doesn't support the strikethrough syntax. So a strikethrough is an inline markup element, just like bold, underline, italic, any of those. But instead, we're going to use two tildes to start and end the strikethrough. So I'm just going to actually undo the change here. And if we want to add a strikethrough to the text here, all we have to do is add two tildes at the start and then two tildes at the end. As soon as we do this, this text is now going to be rendered with a strikethrough. So this is the rendered Markdown, but you can see that VS Code is also adding a strikethrough in our editor as well. The exact meaning of a strikethrough kind of depends on the context. So in this instance, we're saying that maybe preheat oven is something that readers would want to be aware of that was previously documented, but it's something that they should no longer do. So maybe we're saying this is no longer a requirement. You can also use them to indicate changes in your current Markdown document. So if we went down to the ingredient list here and we go to eye of newt, let's say that we wanted to actually change this to eye of fish instead. We could go and add a strikethrough here, again by starting with two tildes and then ending with two tildes, and then type fish. And you can see that now newt has been crossed off in the rendered Markdown, and it's more clear to readers that we should use eye of fish instead. Strikethroughs can also be mixed and matched with bold, underline, or other Markdown inline elements. So if we wanted a bold strikethrough, for instance, we could just go to the start of the strikethrough, add two asterisks, and then at the end, do the same. And you can see now we have a bold strikethrough. So you can mix and match it with all of the normal Markdown elements. You can even create a link that has a strikethrough in it just by going in here and using the link syntax. We are using the strikethrough inside of the link text here. And you can see we now have a link that is being rendered with a strikethrough. So you can mix and match strikethroughs with any of the normal other Markdown inline markup stuff. One limitation of strikethroughs, though, is that you can't use them on multiple paragraphs of text. So let's say that we wanted to add a strikethrough to all of the text down here. If we went and tried to add the two tildes at the start here, and then two tildes at the end, notice how this is not actually being rendered with a strikethrough. That is, again, because they are just normal inline markup elements which only exist within a single paragraph, so they can't just go and span multiple paragraphs. If we wanted to add a strikethrough to multiple paragraphs of text, we have two options. The first would be to add strikethroughs to every single paragraph. So we could go in here, add strikethroughs on the first paragraph, and then add strikethroughs on the second paragraph just by adding tildes everywhere. Now we're going to get the rendering that we expect. The other option, though, is that we could use HTML. So let's just go back here, and we're going to remove all of the tildes here. And now on a blank line before the start of the paragraphs that we want to be rendered with the strikethrough, we're going to add an HTML tag. So we're going to use the S tag here, which is the strikethrough tag. And then on the end of the section that we want to be rendered with the strikethrough, we're going to close off that tag, again on a blank line here, just to make sure that everything's going to be rendered properly. Now you can see that these two paragraphs are going to be rendered correctly, and we can still use our normal markup syntax inside of this text as well. As I mentioned at the start of this video, strikethroughs are non-standard, so they are not part of the common mark spec. Some Markdown engines like Github actually have a slightly different syntax, so you can use either a single tilde or two tildes. So on GitHub, this would actually be rendered with a strikethrough as well. But most Markdown engines, you will need two tildes instead to get the strikethrough. GitHub is also a little different in that instead of using the strikethrough tag in the HTML that it generates, it instead uses the delete tag, which just has a slightly different semantic meaning. They both render the same way though. So that's just an example of how different Markdown engines differ. Now, if you're in a Markdown engine that does not support the tilde strikethrough syntax at all and just has no way of writing strikethroughs, you can probably still use inline HTML. So let's say that our Markdown engine did not support the tilde syntax. We could always go in here, add an S tag, just like we were doing down here. That's the strikethrough tag in HTML, and then add a closing S tag here. And now this is going to be rendered with the strikethrough. Again, all we're doing is using the HTML strikethrough tag instead of the special Markdown strikethrough syntax to achieve the same effect. So that's a quick look at using strikethroughs in Markdown. Remember that this is a non-standard feature, so make sure to check if your Markdown engine supports it before using this syntax.